in the UK. We also work with partner unions, global union federations and NGOs across the world that share our values, which is to defend quality public services and human rights and workers' rights across the world. The past few months have provided a stark reminder of how far we still have to go to achieve the human right to water and sanitation. The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed how access to safe, publicly owned and managed water and sanitation continue to be denied to billions of the world's poorest and most vulnerable people, and the catastrophic impact this has on our public health. The toolkit we are launching today provides an excellent resource for activists in NGOs, social movements and trade unions to fight for the human right to water and sanitation to be protected in domestic law. Whilst the guide looks at the many barriers to the human rights to wash, it focuses on one in particular, privatisation. As a trade union, we have felt the damaging impact of privatisation for decades, not just as workers, but as members of our communities. When profit becomes the drive for what should be a public service, human rights are the first to suffer. And I know from my own experience working for the NHS, the damage that privatisation has done to the health service. 4 decades of evidence has shown us that privatisation costs more in the end. It is less efficient than the public sector, contributes to human rights violations, limits accountability and provides opportunities for corruption, contributes to increased inequality, and the risk always remains with the public sector. But despite almost 300 cases of deprivatisation or remunicipalisation in recent years, the IMF, World Bank and major corporations keep on marketing privatisation as the solution to the very problems it has contributed to. Today, we will hear from 3 outstanding speakers about the right to water and sanitation. Laurin Liu, who authored the report, will introduce us to this important new resource. Sani Baba, Public Service International's Regional Secretary for Arab and Arab countries, will talk about the fight against what privatisation does in his region. Nathalie Seguin, General Coordinator of Civil Society Network, FANMex, will present to us the link between the toolkit and their work on accountability and water safety in schools in Mexico. And I know, I'm sorry, I'm just having to look up other notes because I know we have changed another speaker. We now are going to have Ananya, who, sorry, I can't get her second name out here. If anybody would like to help me, Ananya.
Sure.
Ananya, sorry, your second name, Ananya, sorry. Ananya is
Ramani.
Ananya is the Human Rights and Advocacy Coordinator at Manushya Foundation, an Asia regional NGO aimed at empowering communities to advance social justice and human rights. In her capacity, she monitors the human rights situation on the ground and supports the national and international advocacy initiatives of Manushya Foundation aimed at centering communities' voices, concerns and solutions in the human rights response in their concerned country. During her time at Manushya, she has produced research and advocacy outputs related to business and human rights, digital rights and UN mechanisms. With her work focused both on the human rights situation as well as the law and policy framework in countries, some of the projects she has worked on include the independent CSO National Baseline Assessment of Thailand, the comments to the Thai National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights, a study on the Cybersecurity Act of Thailand, and submissions to the UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and the UN Universal Periodic Review on Leo PDR. She also monitors trials in support of affected communities and human rights defenders. unfairly criminalised through SLAP cases, PP cases, and conducts prison visits to those unfairly detained. Prior to joining Manushya, Ananya worked with the UN advocacy team at the International Commission of Jurists, ICJ, and Forum Asia at their offices in Geneva on their work at the Human Rights Council, the Committee Against Torture, along with projects on access to justice and the interaction of Asian countries with the UN system. She has also worked in analysing laws, drafting policies and providing legal opinions while working as a law researcher at the Ministry of Law and Justice in India, with Amnesty International India, and with a judge from the Supreme Court in India. She holds a Master's of Law International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights from the Geneva Academy of International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights. So welcome, Ananya, and thank you so much for stepping in at such short notice. We will listen to our speakers, and then we will have a half an hour for questions and answers. Our first speaker today will be Laurin Liu. Before she authored this report, Laurin worked as WaterAid's United Nations Advocacy Coordinator. Beyond Welsh circles, Laurin is best known as the youngest female parliamentarian in Canadian history and has an impressive parliamentary record working on labour rights, social protection, international trade, the environment, foreign affairs and international development. I would like to take this opportunity to pass on our thanks to Laurin for authoring this excellent toolkit, which I know will be an important and useful resource for activists globally. Over to you, Laurin.
Thanks, Margaret, for your introduction. And I'm really eager to hear from the other panelists on this call as well, who have so much exciting experience. When I was researching this toolkit, this toolkit really does stay on a global level and on a very international level with international frameworks and laws. But the question of safe water and sanitation is so local. So I'm so eager to hear from these activists as to how this is played out on a domestic and a local level. So I think it might be helpful to run through, to say that the toolkit takes on three core positions. And it might be helpful to run through these positions as to where it's coming from. So first of all, the toolkit takes on the position that a lack of access to safe water and sanitation isn't a question of resource scarcity, but rather a result of bad social, political, and economic choices. So this means that lack of access can be a management or resource allocation issue, and this can stem from root causes such as privatization, corruption, and mismanagement. And this toolkit notably focuses on the question of privatization. A lack of access can also be due to, and also accentuate, economic, regional, gender, and racial inequalities, whether it be intentionally or unintentionally. And in many parts of the world, external factors that are exacerbating mean that water scarcity is here to stay and water insecurity is here to stay, as supplies of water are increasingly threatened by phenomena such as climate change, population growth, demographic changes, and urbanization. And in this context, governments have an obligation to ensure that nobody is left behind when it comes to access to clean drinking water and sanitation. And in most countries, national constitutions, in fact, guarantee non-discrimination and equality, which can give individuals and groups safeguards when discrimination occurs. The second assumption that this toolkit takes is that access to clean drinking water and sanitation are fundamental human rights that are also essential to the realization of all other human rights. Waterborne, for example, waterborne diarrheal diseases are responsible for 2 million deaths globally each year, with the majority occurring in children under 5, according to WHO statistics. And often due to its impact on individuals' health, lack of access can have impacts on livelihood, mobility, and access to education. It means that lack of access can prevent children from attending school and also keep adults from wage earning work. And as Margaret so clearly pointed out in her introduction, in the midst of the global current pandemic, hand washing is one of the first lines of defense against the coronavirus. And so under these circumstances, especially the consequences of communities not having access to proper hand washing facilities can be quite severe. And thirdly, the assumption that the guide toolkit takes is that favoring the provision of water as a public service helps to ensure that access is available to everyone, and it helps to ensure that nobody is left behind. In countries around the world, while doing research for this toolkit, I've found numerous examples of private providers making unreasonable profits from the sale of a public resource. And when private companies take over water systems, we know that profits then become their priority. Examples abound around the world of privatization resulting in unaffordable costs, poor maintenance and safety procedures, loss of union jobs, and subpar services that leave the poorest and most marginalized people behind. And it can also potentially lead to corruption in some cases. And now especially, we've seen last week that two of the world's largest water corporations, Veolia and Suez, are moving towards a merger, which continues to erode any semblance of competition for water privatization deals. So we're moving towards a future in which there'll be less competition and more of a monopoly on the private provision of water, which will have a detrimental, damaging impact on the realization of clean water and sanitation as a human right. So this toolkit is destined for the use of human rights defenders and union activists primarily, and it helps to assemble existing best practices drawing from NGOs, from civil society, and from UN agency and UN publications. And it consists of a brief compilation of global data, information, and best practices for protecting the public provision of water and sanitation services. So I hope that it'll be of great use to you, and I'm happy to answer questions. And on that, I'll pass it on to the next speaker. I think you're on mute, Margaret.
Thank you, Laurin. Thank you so much for keeping to the time, because we are pretty time restrained, as you know, on these webinars. And thank you for that excellent introduction to the toolkit. I'm now going to move on to our second speaker, Sani Baba Mohammed. He is Public Service International Regional Secretary for Africa and the Arab countries. PSI is the global union federation fighting for quality public services and workers' rights, and it brings together 700 trade unions representing 30 million workers in 154 countries. Over to you, Sani. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret, and thanks also, Laurin, for this wonderful presentation on the toolkit. As you rightly introduced me, my name is Sani Baba Mohammed once again. I'm supposed to be based in Lome, Togo, but because of the COVID, I am here in Nigeria trying to reach out to our comrades. I'm really very much happy to be part of this discussion this afternoon. Having gone through the toolkit, which I find it very, very useful, the sense that it's simple, polite, user-friendly, and above all, not generally offensive to most people on the divide. What I'm talking here, I'm particularly talking about trade union organizations and CSOs and even the privateers, which I went through the document like I mentioned, and which has actually touched on a very good critical number of issues that we are fighting against, not only water privatization, but energy, health, and many sort of public sector issues that have been privatized in Africa and the Arab countries. And some of these issues that I've actually tried to look at focused on family units, community, and the moral interest of the society, which has actually been our focus over the last 20 years, where we have been fighting against water privatization. And like I mentioned, the toolkit has actually touched on other aspects like quality public service, which has been our main thrust of our campaign in all the public sector aspects in the PSI. Then I also try to look at the support for infrastructure public funding and financing, which, as we all know, is really very pertinent in Africa. Some of you that really have the experience of what we passed through during the Ebola crisis and now the COVID-19, you realize that many of health infrastructures are very weak, not functioning, and this has actually going to affect the provision of public services to members of the community in general. And I also try to look at the issues around taxation, which the toolkit has actually tried to address. And this is also in line with the campaign that we are doing in the area of tax justice. Like you know, we are losing a lot of money through tax avoidance and tax dodging, where very many big multinationals in Africa and Arab countries are not even paying what they are supposed to pay. Then in the document, it has also made attempt to touch on corruption. And this is something that cannot be missing in the fight against privatization, be it water, energy, or health. This is something that is really very serious in the continent. Corruption is eating deep into what is going on in Africa. And this has also been touched in the document. Then, of course, this agenda on PPPs, like we all know, this is on the agenda of many organizations and countries in Africa, where they are trying very seriously to promote the concept of public-private partnership, which we find it very difficult actually to accept. And many of our affiliates in Africa are rising to the challenge to fight against this concept of PPPs by even promoting the model of public-public partnership, which has gone very far actually in winning the hearts of many parliamentarians in this continent. Then the document has also tried to look at the domestication of international laws. In Africa, we have very beautiful documents, policies, very much in theory, but when it comes to practice, we are really zero in terms of implementation. These documents are very good. They look beautifully designed, but when it comes to implementation to benefit the generality of members of the society, really you find it very weak and zero. And having also looked at the questions and the checklist, and I realized that this is a document that is clearly speaking our minds, the minds of all our affiliates, all those that are interested in fighting against privatization, not necessarily water, that this will definitely help us. This is what we have been doing over the last 30 years, and we have gotten to this level. If we had this sort of document in the last 20 years, we will have gone very, very far with our campaign. We will have achieved a lot. Alassane knows this. And when linking this document to all the campaigns we have been doing in the continent, I will take time, just a few minutes, to look at some countries where we have success stories. For instance, you all know what's going on in Nigeria with the Lagos water. And then, of course, the alliance building we have developed between PSI affiliates and some civil society organizations, which is actually yielding a serious result. We have also gone beyond Lagos to other states of the Federation where water has been privatized. And using this toolkit would definitely help us. And like some of you might have known, there is now another water bill, which is before the National Assembly, and the trade unions and the civil society organizations are coming together to actually challenge that the passage of that water bill, which has been halted for some time. You all know also what is going on in Mauritius, which is also like the story of Lagos. And the unions and some NGOs are also going against that particular aspect, which has also been halted. We know what happened in Tanzania, in Ghana also, when we stopped the Aqua Vitens water management contract, also halting the passage of the water bill in Kenya, and also the struggle we had in Tanzania. These are very good scenarios that we can say we have collectively made serious achievements. I will have loved actually to continue in touching on Gabon, Senegal, Niger, Malawi, and many other countries where we have success stories. But I think time might not permit, but if there are questions, I will come back to that. But generally, I can say I find this document very useful, and it's really going to help our struggle against water privatization. And we have achieved a lot already. And I want to salute Laurin for producing this document that is really polite, like I mentioned, user-friendly, and generally not offensive to whoever actually goes through it. So I think this is a milestone that will help our struggle, and definitely success will be on our side. So I don't know whether I still have more minutes so that I can touch on other countries, or probably I'll come back to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sani. I'm going to now hand over to our next speaker, who is Nathalie Seguin, General Coordinator of the Freshwater Action Network, Mexico. FANMex campaigns for the human right to water and sanitation on a local and national level, and works to improve water policy and build the capacity of local organizations. Over to you, Nathalie.
Muchas gracias. Les voy a pedir a todos que cambien y pongan su interpretación. Voy a estar hablando en español. Muchísimas gracias a End Water Poverty y UNISON por la invitación y particularmente por el enfoque que le han dado a este manual. El de recordar la importancia de fortalecer la provisión de los servicios de agua y saneamiento para la realización del derecho humano al agua y saneamiento, y los grandes riesgos en creer que el sector privado puede resolver el enorme problema de falta de acceso a estos fundamentales servicios. Agradezco también la traducción de este evento al español, es realmente un privilegio, y esperemos que muy pronto podamos contar con una versión en español del manual. Como lo han mencionado, soy Nathalie Seguin, coordinadora de la Red de Acción por el Agua, una red de organizaciones que trabajamos para la realización del derecho humano al agua y saneamiento con tres principales líneas de trabajo. Una, el fortalecimiento de las capacidades de nuestros miembros, de las comunidades con las que trabajamos, de los ciudadanos en general, de las autoridades locales y nacionales. También hemos trabajado con ellos para fortalecer su conocimiento en relación al derecho humano al agua y saneamiento. Evaluar los avances de implementación e investigación sobre las causas por las cuales no se logra el pleno disfrute del derecho humano al agua y saneamiento en México. Y por tercero, incidir en leyes y políticas públicas para la realización del derecho humano al agua y saneamiento, así como los ODS vinculados a la Agenda 2030, tanto a nivel nacional como regional y global. Siendo estas nuestras líneas de trabajo, es muy oportuno que el manual que tenemos el gusto de presentar hoy no solo recuerda sobre los criterios que deben cumplir de acceso, de calidad, de disponibilidad, de asequibilidad y aceptabilidad, tanto para agua como saneamiento, sino que subraya la importancia de los principios en base a los cuales se debe de aplicar la ley. Es decir, el principio de no discriminación y equidad, el acceso a la información y transparencia, la participación y la rendición de cuentas. Es muy oportuno que este manual subraya estos aspectos del derecho humano, porque generalmente se olvidan. En los últimos años en México se ha entendido, en los últimos 10 años más o menos, el derecho humano al agua y saneamiento ya ha logrado percolar en los tomadores de decisión, en los proveedores, el entendimiento, no quiero decir en la implementación, pero en el entendimiento. Pero ojo, aún falta que se logre entender lo que realmente significa no discriminación y equidad. ¿Qué significa el acceso a una información de calidad, oportuna, que esté verdaderamente traduciendo lo que está sucediendo en la realidad? ¿Qué significa la transparencia? La participación de la población y no nada más un check de avisarles lo que se va a hacer, que es lo que normalmente sucede en México, y particularmente la rendición de cuentas. Los tomadores de decisión en México, particularmente los responsables de la provisión de agua y saneamiento, no relacionan estos principios con el derecho humano al agua y saneamiento. Entonces, la tabla que presenta este manual como checklist es un instrumento de gran ayuda para entender qué significa cada uno de estos principios en la práctica, ¿no? Para ponerlos en contexto, México ha reportado cobertura de agua y saneamiento superior a 90% sistemáticamente. Sin embargo, cualquier persona que ha vivido o viajado en México sabe que estas cifras no son reales. Nadie puede beber agua del grifo y, sin embargo, se reporta que tenemos una cobertura de agua potable de 94.4%, pero no podemos beberla. Luego tenemos que entre el 70 y 90% de los ríos y lagos y barrancas están contaminados en México. Sin embargo, se asegura que se tiene una cobertura de saneamiento nacional de 91.4%. Estas cifras no coinciden. No coincide la realidad con la teoría. Y bueno, hay varios conceptos por los cuales esto no es así, pero básicamente se habla de agua potable, pero no es potable. Y en saneamiento se considera saneamiento, pero lo único que se hace es recolectar el agua y tirarla en ríos, barrancas, lagos, en fin. Entonces, esta situación es lo que se reporta y no es la realidad. Este es un problema porque al final nos impacta porque en todos los reportes globales tenemos como si tuviéramos resuelto el problema, pero la realidad es otra. Entonces, tenemos que ir entendiendo estas distancias. Retomando el tema de calidad de agua y entrando de lleno al caso que quisiera yo ilustrar, tenemos en México un grave problema de calidad de agua. Y este caso ilustra perfectamente cómo la mercantilización del agua ha normalizado la falta de cumplimiento del Estado de proveer agua de calidad para beber. Y les cuento una breve historia. En México se volvió el primer consumidor de agua embotellada. Y cómo esto ha impactado en la falta de calidad de agua que se provee en el país. Fue en el año 85 más o menos, cuando hubo un gran terremoto en México, se rompen las cañerías y ductos y momentáneamente aguas negras y limpias se mezclan. Esto fue aprovechado por las grandes transnacionales que veían en el embotellamiento de las fuentes de agua una mina de oro. E inundaron el país y las mentes de los ciudadanos de que la única opción saludable era beber agua embotellada. Los organismos operadores en esa época pues nunca se practicaba ni la transparencia ni la rendición de cuentas en cuanto a la calidad de agua que proveía. Y no solo informaban de la calidad de agua que proveían, sino que fueron poco a poco olvidándose de su obligación de cumplir con la norma 127 de la Secretaría de Salud que establece los parámetros de agua de uso y consumo humano. Hoy en día, a pesar de que el país tiene la mitad de la población viviendo bajo la línea de pobreza, más de 60 millones de habitantes, gasta una buena parte de su salario y tiempo para poder comprar botellas de agua para vivir. Entonces, bueno, este abandono de las obligaciones del Estado sigue vigente hoy en día en el 2020. Hemos analizado más de 27,000 dictámenes oficiales de calidad de agua que llega a 25,000 escuelas del país. Y hemos podido comprobar que la calidad de agua no solo no cumple con la norma, sino que los niveles de contaminación con la que puede llegar a incumplir ponen alto riesgo de salud a la comunidad escolar y los ciudadanos en general. Tenemos arsénico, tenemos fluoruro, tenemos plomo, tenemos coliformes fecales. En fin, el ejercicio de transparencia para la incidencia que estamos realizando FANMex en colaboración con Cántaro Azul y el Inventario Nacional de Calidad de Agua, dos otras plataformas, consistió en recuperar toda esta información oficial que no nos querían proveer, transferirla a una base de datos que permitiera su manejo, porque nos la dieron en PDF. La ley indica que tienen que entregar datos abiertos para poder manipular y la hemos puesto en una plataforma de internet que se llama aguaenescuelas.mx. Esto va a permitir al ciudadano en general, al estudiante, al maestro, conocer la calidad de agua que se entrega a su escuela. No son todas las escuelas del país, pero son alrededor de 25,000 escuelas. Esta plataforma tiene un objetivo de incidencia principal. Al evidenciar la mala calidad de agua que están proveyendo a la ciudadanía, exigir a las autoridades responsables de proveer el agua para uso y consumo que cumpla la norma y dejar de comprar o obligar a la ciudadanía de estar comprando botellas de agua. Luego tenemos otros objetivos secundarios, que es el de informar a la comunidad de estudiantes, el de ayudar a entender el impacto en la salud que esto implica, pero también el de plantear rutas de acción, la búsqueda de soluciones. Y en ese sentido es que este manual tiene un gran impacto o un gran uso. Es una herramienta que va a permitir tanto a las comunidades de estudiantes como escolares como autoridades entender verdaderamente qué significa en la vida cotidiana el derecho humano al agua y saneamiento y los riesgos que implica buscar o transferir la responsabilidad al sector privado de esto. Entonces, lo que buscamos con esta plataforma que vamos a estar presentando el 27 de octubre y que haremos llegar la invitación a todos ustedes, es el de poder fortalecer los servicios públicos y crear, crear acuerdos público-comunitarios, más en una región como América Latina, que ha resuelto su problema de falta de servicios de agua con comités de agua comunitarios. Entonces, es también interesante abordar el tema de los acuerdos público-comunitarios que podrían entrar en juego en una región como América Latina, México. Es urgente y crear, ¿no? Fortalecer regulación. Ese es uno de los grandes problemas que tenemos en México, la falta de regulación. Y el pensar que el sector privado se puede autorregular, como se pretende, es imposible cuando sabemos que lo que buscan es una maximización de costos. Entonces, con esto cierro y agradezco mucho la posibilidad de haber podido presentar el caso que estamos trabajando en México y cómo este tipo de herramientas son de mucho uso, de mucha utilidad para los ciudadanos en un país como México, que aparentemente lo ha resuelto, pero tenemos todavía muchísimos millones de personas que no cuentan con acceso al agua de buena calidad. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nathalie, and thank you for keeping on time. Thank you for. Can I just take this opportunity to remind participants to please keep sending us questions using the Q&A box. Our final speaker today is Ananya Ramani, and I've already given you an introduction.
Thank you so much, Margaret.
So I'm just going to hand over to you, Ananya.
Thank you so much, Margaret, for the lovely introduction earlier, and thank you for this opportunity. Also, this the advocacy toolkit, we see it as very important because it highlights the importance of advocacy strategies, and to just provide a little insight to how we look at it.
Hold on a sec. I think the Spanish interpreter has to change her channels.
Yeah.
We are hearing the Spanish interpretation, please. Go on. Can you start again, Ananya?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So I just wanted to thank UNISON and End Water Poverty for this toolkit because it highlights the importance of advocacy strategies. It's something in accessing the right to safe drinking water and sanitation. And it's something that we've also seen in our work here in Asia. And I would just like to highlight how important it is by providing a spotlight on one case. We mostly work with local communities at the grassroots level. And so we would just like to provide a quick overview on this one case and the strategies we followed, and how we hope to use the toolkit also in the future. So the case I'm going to talk about is from central Thailand. In the Pichit and Phetchabun provinces of central Thailand, there are more than 6,000 people that villagers that have been negatively affected by the gold mining operations of a company called Akara. It's a Thai subsidiary of an Australian parent company called Kingsgate. So the company started its mining operations way back in 2001, and the mining operations took place just at a distance of about like 300 meters from where the community members were living. As a result of this, what's happened is over the last 20 years, since most of these people are farmers, their lives and livelihood has completely been destroyed, not just because of the harm caused by the mining operation, but also by the inaction from the Thai government also in ensuring that they have access to their basic rights. So just to provide you a bit insight of the damage that was caused, starting in 2003, the first signs of harm was through air and noise pollution. How it started out was basically because of the controlled blasts that took place at the mining site, and also the use of trucks to transport the material from the mines. But consequently, what happened is also the community started to find it difficult to get sufficient water for their consumption, but also for their farming, because most of the water was being redirected to the mine itself. But the biggest damage was caused when they started to notice that the groundwater had been contaminated with heavy metals, including cyanide, arsenic, manganese. And this was as a result of the runoff from the storage facility of the mine. The water, because of this, the water could no longer be used for any of their activities. It was something that in 2010, the Thai government actually acknowledged that the groundwater was contaminated, but neither the government nor the company took any measures to actually redress the issue and provide sufficient clean water to these individuals. Not only like they didn't have water for farming, but they didn't even have enough water for consumption. So for a lot of them, they were provided water in spurts, but often the water was not sufficient to cover all those affected. There were 6,000 different villagers, and it was often for short periods of time, and sometimes the water was not even at a level where it was safe to consume. Villagers who could afford it had to travel far distances to get water and also to get vegetables because they could no longer consume what they were growing. And those who did not have money, they were just forced to continue consuming the contaminated water, and also they continue to consume the vegetables that they were growing with the contaminated water. This caused a lot of damage to their health. A lot of them developed different forms of diseases, and some as serious as they even saw signs of skin cancer, blood cancer, liver cancer. Often they had to travel very far distances to get this treated. A lot of them suffered from depression, so it just added to their medical costs and the distance they had to travel to get any help. Additionally, what happened is resulting from the contaminated groundwater. A lot of these individuals who were farmers could no longer continue to farm. So they also had to, a lot of them migrated. Some of them continued to live there, but had to travel far distances for jobs, which were often unsafe. And those who had no option continued to grow vegetables with the contaminated water and sell them, which was damaging to them, but also the people who consume those vegetables at the end. All of this became difficult also because the company blocked access to the public highway. Water was difficult to access. So it also showed a complete control by the company over all their public utilities and resources. All the community members, they tried to continuously seek solutions to raise awareness on the challenges and the harm caused by the company, as well as government inaction. They did this by filing complaints with government authorities, filing complaints before the National Human Rights Commission of Thailand, even filing a complaint with the Australian Embassy They had peaceful protests. They told their story on social media, but instead of receiving any solution, they were threatened, they were intimidated, they were imprisoned in cases, and they also had a lot of court cases filed against them. All of these were just used as tactics to silence them and also to completely deplete their financial resources. However, we were very happy to see that these villagers, they've not stopped their fight, and they continue to raise their voice about the harm caused by the company. Eventually, in January of 2017, the government was forced to close down the mine, but there were two difficulties with that, because the government used an anti-democratic provision from the constitution that the military government had put in place, the Thai military government, and they were the ones who used it. So a lot of people, criticized that. But additionally, there was no effective remedy. So there was no solution to the challenges they were facing. There was no compensation. There was no effort to clean the environment they lived in. So they continue to stay in those difficult circumstances. So as a result of this, what we are trying to do is, although the mining operations itself was stopped using anti-democratic means, we are trying to, along with the communities, we're trying to push back and fight this whole situation using more democratic means to access justice at both the national and international level. And here is where our advocacy strategies come in. At the national level at present, what we're doing is we are supporting the communities as they file the class action lawsuit against the company. And what they hope to do is receive compensation for three basic harms that have been caused. One is to the individual health of all of the villagers. The second is the damage to the environment. So also compensating individuals, but restoring the environment as well. And the third is for the loss of livelihood and loss of their jobs. So for that, what we do is Manushya Foundation tries to support the financial costs for the court case where possible. We are monitoring the court hearings to ensure that they follow due process. We're assisting with capacity building activities by providing the members with security training so that they're safe both online and offline, and also legal empowerment workshops. At the international level, we've adopted three main advocacy strategies. The first is we are making submissions to relevant UN Special Rapporteurs, and this includes the UN Special Rapporteur on right to safe drinking water and sanitation, which we're doing along with End Water Poverty, in fact. And these submissions are mainly to hold the Australian parent company Kingsgate, as well as its Thai subsidiary Akara, both of them accountable, as well as the government accountable for their inaction. The second international advocacy strategy we've adopted is to file a complaint to the OECD National Contact Point in Australia. This is to hold the main parent company accountable. And finally, we are also approaching the Business and Human Rights Resource Center to send letters to the company to question the harm they've caused, basically, and hold them to account in that manner. So for us, in our work throughout, in supporting communities, we really adopt advocacy strategies, because while we identify the challenges, we also join them in their fight to push back to access their rights. And as you can see, all the human rights harms that were caused are all started with the right to water, and they were all interrelated. So for us, we realized the importance of using advocacy as a tool to ensure human rights are protected and respected. And this toolkit will go a long way for that. We really look forward to using the knowledge from the toolkit to share that with the communities we work with and see how they can adapt it to their situation and how it helps them. Thank you.
Margaret, you're on mute.
Oh, it's a nuisance. I'm not going to ask. Thank you so much, Ananya. Thank you for all our speakers. I'm not going to ask the panel to answer, well, as many questions as we can, the time allows. I'm going to ask 3 questions at a time and give each of the panel the opportunity to respond to those questions. So I'm going to start off with the first question, which is from John Garrett. Oh, sorry. First question is from, yeah, what says here? I'll give you John Garrett's one anyway. He's thanking us for the presentations, and we'd be interested in the panelists' views on how governments in Africa, Asia, and Latin America can best strengthen tax and other revenues and public spending so that the public sector can fund essential rights like water and sanitation. Our next one is from Jackson Mwenya. How do we deal with situations where the service providers, the UN agencies or government, are not considering much the SDG indicators vis-a-vis with human rights principles? And our third question is actually from an anonymous attendee. In cases where government have repeatedly failed in maintaining or sustaining water supplies to citizens, shouldn't the private sector be encouraged to take over in a bid to maintain regular supply? So whichever one of you panelists want to answer first, if you want to answer the first question of the panel and then move on to the second and then the third, but whichever one would like to go first.
Bueno, voy a tomar la palabra, si quieren cambiar su traducción, aprovechando la interpretación. En relación a la primera pregunta de John Garrett, cómo fortalecer impuestos y otro tipo de entradas para el gasto público, creo que hay que mencionar y reconocer que existe ya un gasto público. Y lo primero que hay que hacer es revisar cómo se está gastando ese gasto público. Muchas veces ese gasto de esta inversión pública se va a grandes infraestructuras que no forzosamente están respondiendo a las necesidades de las poblaciones que no cuentan con acceso al agua y saneamiento. Entonces, lo primero que hay que hacer es fortalecer los sistemas de información, los sistemas de monitoreo y desagregación de la información para poder identificar cuáles son las poblaciones que realmente se necesita invertir para ir reduciendo la brecha que existe entre el acceso y el no acceso. México es un país emergente, o así le llaman, ¿no? de economía media, en la que tenemos grandes desigualdades, grandes fortunas, como sucede en otros países, pero también grandes pobrezas. Sin embargo, hay un dinero, y hay un dinero que se está mal empleando, mal utilizando. Entonces, lo primero que habría que hacer es revisar en dónde y cómo se está gastando antes de pedir más impuestos. Antes de pedir más dinero, hay que revisar en dónde se gasta, cómo se gasta, y tiene que estarse haciendo este tipo de inversión con un enfoque de derechos. Y por eso este manual puede ser de enorme ayuda, sobre todo para los gobiernos locales, para poder ir entendiendo cómo es que le pueden ir dando este enfoque. Entonces, lo dejaría así. Creo que hay un esfuerzo mayor que se debe de realizar. Antes de pedir más dinero, revisemos dónde se está gastando y para quién y para qué se está gastando.
Thank you very much, Nathalie. Would anyone of our other panelists like to add something to that?
Yes, I would like to. So to answer the question again of taxation, another form of public revenue, I think my answer would be a little similar to Nathalie, because the challenges we face are the same. So in Asia, again, I would say it's a matter of political will to really help individuals access these rights. Often the issue is with public spending going into, let me give you the example of Thailand. So what happens in Thailand is a lot of the funding that goes into providing safe drinking water, most of it has gone into building institutional mechanisms, government institutional mechanisms. And often there is no proper communication between the different institutions. So at one side, Thailand is trying to promote industrial development, which requires huge amounts of water. And there is, on the other hand, there's a major drought issue in Thailand. And there's still a huge population that depends on farming as their source of income, which is again, resource intensive and it's dependent on water. So there is this sort of disjointed sort of impact. And again, looking at Thailand, there's also, when it comes to the trickle down effect, there is a difference of an understanding probably at the national government level and amongst local authorities. So often there is a budget set aside for any aspect you take, water, or even if it comes to public health, there's an amount set aside, but most of it is concentrated in Bangkok, which is the capital, and none of it goes to the other parts of Thailand. Most of the local communities that require the support and that are dependent on land, like for farming, they're all based in other parts of Thailand, and often the funding doesn't reach them. So there is this disjointed understanding of aspects. There's a complete, there's no proper communication between different government institutions, and ultimately sometimes it's just a lack of political will, because there has to be a complete, I think, realignment of the way funding is approached. And I do believe that it's very important to talk to local community members, place them at the center of processes. So just like we try to do at our organization, to try and understand where they really need the support and provide them where it's required. Otherwise, none of their human rights are actually being protected. Thank you.
Thank you, Ananya. Sani?
Yeah, thank you, Margaret. I think I share the same views with colleagues so far expressed. In Africa, what we're doing so far is actually going on with our campaign in the area of tax justice, as also highlighted in the toolkit. Our campaign has gone very far, and we have also presented a lot of demands to various governments in Africa and also the AU and some regional organizations. Actually, how our governments can also review their taxes and then prioritize also their areas of spending to cut unnecessary spendings. And we have also tried to make serious advocacy to all governments in Africa to stick to all the pledges and the decisions they took so far. For instance, in 2006, all African countries took a very good position to dedicate 15% of their budget to support health infrastructure. But unfortunately, they don't live to expectation. Only few countries are even paying, dedicating up to 5% of their total budget. So we are calling on all our governments in Africa to actually reorder their priorities, cut spendings on unnecessary issues, and then focus more on how to raise funds internally to support public infrastructure, and also invest heavily in such areas. Otherwise, if in the last 20 years our governments have invested so far in all these structures, we would have been facing all the weak infrastructure we're having now, arising from weak and decayed health infrastructure, water system, railways, transportation, and what have you. So the governments, fortunately enough, are listening to these demands, and they are going ahead to also put certain policies in place, and with clear implementation where trade unions and also civil society organizations are part of this process. And right now, we're even having programs with some governments on whistleblower policies, where people will be encouraged to actually expose corrupt practices and some of these malpractices, so that at least we can begin to look internally how to raise funds to support public infrastructure, and then limit also this aspect of borrowing from all these various countries. You can see over the years, 3 years ago, many head of states have been going on an adventure from China to Japan to Pakistan to UK looking for investors. And we told them clearly that all this invitation for investments will definitely not work if the stakeholders are not carried along. Internally first, to design actually how these funds should be spent, rather than going on things that are not going to actually help members of the society. And so far, the governments are listening to this, and I can say in few years to come, definitely we will get out of the woods if we insist on our advocacy and campaigns. Thank you.
Thank you, Sani. Question 2, if whoever wants to lead in the panel on that. Who wants to speak first on Jackson's question on the service providers? Hello?
Could you just repeat the question very quickly for?
Yes, Jackson. How do we deal with a situation where the service providers, be the UN agencies or government, are not considering much the SDG indicators rise with human rights principles?
Bueno, si quieren tomo la iniciativa. Me parece que una de las primeras cosas que tenemos que subrayar una vez más, y por eso este manual me parece muy atinado, es recordar que los principios de no discriminación, de participación, de acceso a información, forman parte del derecho humano al agua y saneamiento. Y esto es algo que tenemos que seguir repitiendo y repitiendo como mantra, para que finalmente logre percolar en la conciencia de los tomadores de decisiones que es parte del derecho humano al agua y saneamiento y que forma parte también de los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible, porque finalmente los principios del derecho humano, de los derechos humanos, están vinculados y forman parte de la Agenda 2030. Entonces, es una cuestión, es como para el derecho humano al agua y saneamiento hace 10 años. Tenemos que seguir repitiendo y repitiendo y repitiendo para que se entienda que no están desvinculados, que forma parte de una misma cosa y que tenemos que seguir insistiendo en que la participación, la transparencia, la rendición de cuentas forma parte que no pueden evitar y que se tiene que implementar al mismo tiempo que la provisión del agua y saneamiento, ¿no? Entonces, lo dejaría ahí y me gustaría retomar algunas de las preguntas que están haciendo alusión a los acuerdos público-privado, como si fuera una opción viable, y me gustaría posteriormente mencionar algunos puntos al respecto.
Okay. Okay. Are we fine with that then? Would any of the other two panelists would like to say anything else on that? No? Can we move on then to the third question? Who would like to start that? That came from our anonymous person. Do you want me to repeat it? Are you okay? The third question was, in cases where government have repeatedly failed in maintaining or sustaining water supply to citizens, shouldn't the private sector be encouraged to take over in a bid to maintain regular supply? And who wants to start off? Who wants to lead off in that?
Bueno.
Way to go, Nathalie. Thank you so much.
No, go ahead, please, Anaya.
You go. Not Sani?
Yeah, I think this question is a very nice question, and I am happy to receive this question because it's also linked to the earlier question about who is to be held responsible when either the service provider, when there's provision of low quality. This has actually been always the excuse that the privateers and our governments in Africa use to justify why they should always hand over such services to the privateers, simply because when government fails in its own responsibility, they look for excuses. This is exactly what we have seen in the provision of communication and also transportation. Like government can be beating their chest in Africa that they're doing very well in communication, not knowing that it is the same government that weakened the system so as to justify why they should also go to the privateers. But there are two legs in this aspect. You have to look at the government, and there's those that also implement the policies and the end beneficiaries of these services. If the government fails to provide what they are supposed to provide in terms of provision of services by providing enough resources, enough environment, and paying good salary to the workers and laying pipes, and making sure they take control of these provisions, then definitely the workers will have to actually implement all those that are put in place. Then the beneficiaries also themselves, they also have to do their bit by doing what they are supposed to do as members of the same society. Then of course, what we have always been advocating for is the role of stakeholders. Who are now the stakeholders in service provision? The government, the workers, and the beneficiaries. As long as you don't bring these three together, then definitely the end result will be weak. So this is what has been failing completely in Africa. Then of course, this question of justifying why the public services are failing is just because our governments are corrupt and they want to take their share from the privateers. So you discover that in Africa, both the privateers who provide these services, they don't give results, they don't provide results, and they are mostly corrupt, and they are corrupting those people in government. So we continue to say no to this. As long as our governments in Africa don't do the right thing, definitely will not get out of it. I will continue to fight for the right thing to be done until we also put the right people in place in the government, in the governance of our people in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sani. Nathalie?
Yes. Bueno, muchas gracias. Yo estoy completamente de acuerdo con lo que mi colega acaba de mencionar. El hecho de que sea un sector privado que opera en un país en donde no hay una regulación, no hay una sanción a quien no cumple las reglas, no va a ser distinto el trabajo. El sector privado per se busca la maximización de las utilidades. Cuando buscas una maximización de utilidades, tu último grupo que buscas ofrecer el servicio son aquellos que no tienen dinero para pagar. Y son justamente esos grupos que necesitan mejorar su condición de acceso al agua potable y saneamiento. Entonces, creer que el sector privado va a resolver la enorme brecha que tenemos de poblaciones que no cuentan con el acceso al agua y saneamiento es realmente muy, muy infantil, diría yo, pensar que el sector privado lo va a resolver. Por otro lado, el tema, digamos, de la regulación, y voy a insistir en este aspecto, porque en México, por ejemplo, no contamos con un ente regulador que esté monitoreando el trabajo que se hace ni en el sector público, pero tampoco y mucho menos en el sector privado. ¿Eso qué quiere decir? Que finalmente el sector privado se deja a la autorregulación. Y el sector privado lo único que va a hacer es repetir los malos patrones de falta de transparencia, de abuso de tarifas y una serie de problemas que se repiten cuando no existe ninguna entidad que los está vigilando y que está asegurando que cumplan con las obligaciones que supuestamente les han solicitado al firmar un convenio. Entonces, el sector privado no tiene por qué entrar mientras no haya un sistema de regulación fuerte y autónomo que permita monitorear y sancionar en caso de que no estén cumpliendo con sus obligaciones. Gracias.
Thank you very much. Ananya, are you okay, or do you want to say something in that?
Yeah, I think again I would be voicing thank you, Margaret, and I think I'll be voicing the same opinions that Sani and Nathalie said as well. It is the issues that would exist in the public sector or public provision of water and sanitation is not something that by the private sector coming in, the problem would go away, because again, like Nathalie pointed out, the difficulty is in holding the private sector accountable. So they're not like a one solution to all the problems, because the issues that exist would still exist. There could still be discrimination. There could still be difficulty in accessing information on the right itself. And often those affected, just to again highlight, they are mostly at the grassroots level. It's not people in cities, it's mostly people who are in rural areas in Asia. That's what we've seen. And they don't have access to these decision makers, either in the when it comes to governments or in the private sector. And it becomes more difficult with the private sector, because with the government, there are public channels to access them. It's just that they may not be as effective, and it would take repeated efforts. But with the private sector, how accessible is an accountability mechanism? How accessible is it to ensure that once you give the private sector the job, these individuals' rights are actually respected? It's also a matter of that. So I don't think it should be looked at as the one solution or the only solution. And it is about, like Nathalie said, strengthening public institutions, and that's where the effort should be focused on.
Thank you, Ananya. I'm now going to ask another series of questions, and this one is from an anonymous attendee. Hello, colleagues. The discussions are really inspiring and increasing the effectiveness of advocacy on the right to water, especially in Africa. However, I wanted to find out whether privatisation options using PPP may be better placed to ensure respect of the right to water than full privatisation. I'm asking this question as funding of water services has largely shifted towards development banks, who often demand government to partner with governments. The next question is from Ibrahima, Sila, and I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing that right. How do you achieve the right to water if financial resources are limited and you're in an undemocratic state? And the third question is, do the panel expect to see an increase in the use of investor-state dispute settlements, private courts, to be used by private water companies to sue governments for introducing emergency measures which might affect their profits during the COVID pandemic? Did you get those three questions okay? Who wants to lead? Nathalie?
No. Well, I didn't get the third one, but I might just, sorry, voy a seguir en español. No escuché la última, pero de alguna manera ya habíamos respondido la primera pregunta en el sentido de que los acuerdos públicos privados no han sido los adecuados, no es una opción adecuada si no se tienen previamente fortalecidos los sistemas de regulación, de acceso a información y de transparencia, ¿no? La tercera pregunta, la verdad, no la logré escuchar.
Right, the third question. Do the panel expect to see an increase in the use of investor-state dispute settlements, the private courts, to be used by private water companies to sue governments for introducing emergency measures which might affect their profits during the COVID pandemic? Is that okay? Nathalie, did you get it? Right. So whichever you want to questions you want to lead on. If you think the first question has already been answered, then move on to question 2, the second one that was asked.
Bueno, en relación a la tercera que acabas de leer, a mí me parece que justo este manual es muy interesante porque advierte sobre los riesgos, los grandes riesgos que conlleva de invitar al sector privado a hacer este tipo de inversiones o este tipo de acuerdos, porque muchas veces los gobiernos locales o incluso estatales o incluso federales no se logran dar cuenta del impacto que esto puede tener en el momento en que algo no funciona en ese acuerdo. Si la compañía no está cumpliendo con sus obligaciones e intentan cancelar el acuerdo, entran estos grandes conflictos que llevan a los gobiernos a gastar millones y millones de dólares en defender con abogados, digamos, problemas que no tenían que haber entrado en un inicio. Yo creo que justo este manual apunta a esta grave problemática que muchos gobiernos o muchos funcionarios públicos no vislumbran en el momento en que invitan al sector privado. Entonces, creo que el manual tiene un gran potencial en esa línea. Gracias.
What our other two panelists, any who want to contribute anything to any of them questions? Ananya, yeah?
Sure. So on the first question on PPPs, public-private partnerships, again, there, it's like Nathalie said, it's sort of been answered because when it comes to PPPs, there's no clear distinction on like who's taking responsibility for what. It's a more mired structure, especially when it comes to, coming back to the region we work in, Asia. The challenge is there is a lot of corruption, and when it comes to PPP relationships, it often is to the benefit of both the company and the government, but there's no trickle-down effect to people often. And unless there's an actual political will to look beyond profits and to actually look at people, place people over profits, I don't think that, again, unless there are very strong accountability mechanisms that are, again, multi-stakeholder, independent, it's not such a good solution to use PPPs either. I think instead we should put more strength and use more advocacy to call for stronger public measures, because it's all about accountability and how we can access justice in case rights are violated. I know it's a situation we're looking at worst case, but just to clarify on that. Yeah, and I think the third question Nathalie answered, so and for the second question, it's something I'm also thinking an answer to and wondering, because it's a challenge we see in this region, but I don't really have an answer to that question. I don't know what's an ideal solution. Yeah.
Sani?
Yeah, thank you. I think Ananya has actually answered some of the questions, but on the first question, I want to say there is no distinction between PPP and full privatization. They are all the same. It's just a matter of language in Africa being used by our government to deceive the people. So if they are talking about options, I think there's no any option apart from water being under state control or under public hands. And then rather than deceiving the people, I think the government, the money that government is using to pay the privateers who do not have any investment in any part of Africa should be channeled in actually training the workers and even the end users, so that they can also know how to actually keep water in the hands of our various governments. And we can now see clearly that COVID-19 has really exposed the privateer. They have all gone into hiding. Governments are relying on public sector workers who are providing services, who are the frontline workers who are sacrificing their lives actually to save their fellow citizens. So really, these are the people that are the frontliners, that are the ones actually supporting members of the society. And this actually goes hand in hand with water provision in our country. We have seen it clearly in the energy sector, while these privateers come to Africa without even a dime. They use the license or the certificate to go to the banks and collect loans, at the same time now increase the tariffs. That's why you find strikes and protests going all over Africa because of this tariff increase and what have you. And these privateers do not actually take care of the actual needs of the most vulnerable in the society, women, children, and the poor people. So whether you call it commercialization or unbundling or whatever name you give it, PPP remains at full privatization. So why don't our governments, this is what we are appealing, and we have a model which you all know, public partnership. Why don't you now start talking between governments and governments so that they can now bring their expertise and train the people and leave them in the country so that they can continue with this provision of services, rather than bringing privateers who hire a small room in London or in America and then come to Africa just to get money for profit. So this is the kind of advocacy we are using, and we're also challenging all our governments in the region actually to try other models, not just stick to PPP. We have tried in other countries. You have seen what is happening in Ghana, where the Open Water and the Ghana Water Limited Company is there. You have it also in Tanzania between the WASA and the WASCO. That's the Dar es Salaam Water Company and Dar es Salaam Water Agency. They are there. They're doing very well. So public-public partnership is the best way to go than PPP. So whatever name you give privatization, it remains as privatization, just enriching the few who are corrupting actually our people in government. I think that's just what I can say about PPP. It's never an option and can never be an option in Africa and Arab countries.
Thank you so much, Sani Baba. And I'm really sorry, but we don't have any more time for any more questions. Unfortunately, we are very, restricted on how many questions we take because of the timing of the webinars and that. But I just want to thank our panelists, Sani Baba, Nathalie and Ananya, for their contribution. And thanks in particular to Laurin for your presentation, especially for this excellent toolkit. Our thanks also to Al Hassan and Sam at End Water Poverty for your collaboration on this report, as well as EWP's excellent ongoing work on Claim Your Water Rights. Is there any final comments from the members of the panel? Would any of you like to sum up? Yes, Nathalie.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Thank you all of you. Perdón, en español. Gracias a todos ustedes. Gracias por compartir su experiencia. Gracias por la invitación. Y me gustaría cerrar. Habían varias preguntas en relación a la corrupción. Yo creo que la corrupción está en todos los países. Tanto los países que no tienen fuerte regulación como los países que se dicen desarrollados o ricos, que son muchas veces los que motivan este tipo de práctica en los países que no tienen una regulación adecuada. En ese sentido, me gustaría cerrar diciendo que el tema de corrupción solo lo podemos enfrentar fortaleciendo el acceso a la información, midiendo, monitoreando la información, desagregando la información para poder verdaderamente tener desde los ciudadanos la información adecuada y poder ir llamando a cuentas a las instituciones públicas para que cumplan con la obligación de el derecho humano al agua y saneamiento. Entonces, sin duda la corrupción siempre ha sido un tema que aparece como un gran muro para la realización del derecho humano al agua y saneamiento, pero se tiene que empezar con fortalecer la información, fortalecer la transparencia para que entonces podamos acceder a una rendición de cuentas que permita reducir la corrupción. Muchísimas gracias a todos.
Thank you, Nathalie. Sani, Ananya, would you like to say anything else? Ananya?
Yeah. Sure. I just wanted to once again thank UNISON and Water Poverty for this opportunity, and we really look forward to using the toolkit not just to hold again, use it as an advocacy strategy, not just to hold governments accountable, but also the private sector, so that not only do they, if there is privatization of resources, that they do follow practices that comply with human rights, international human rights law, and their obligation to respect human rights under the UN guiding principles on business and human rights, but also so that they don't cause harm to anybody that they are trying to unintentionally or intentionally, often it's intentional, but harm as a result of any of their business activities. And that accountability mechanisms, even if human rights violations are committed, accountability mechanisms are strengthened to be transparent and provide effective solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ananya. Sani?
Yeah, thank you, Margaret. I just want to take this opportunity to thank the organizers of this webinar and all the participants who have actually given us an opportunity to share a few things we are doing in Africa and also as PSI. So I will call on our colleagues to log into our website and see the campaigns we are doing, especially in the areas of our tax justice in Africa, because this actually has been a bane of our problem in Africa, corruption, and then of course the bleeding in Africa, where the resources of Africa and money is being stolen and stashed in other parts of the world. So we want to appeal to all and sundry to join us in this campaign, so at least Africa can regain its lost glory. Thank you, comrades.
Thank you, Sani. Thank you, all of you. 10 years after we achieved the human right to water and sanitation at the UN General Assembly, it is a tragedy that it's a right that continues to be denied to the world's poorest and most vulnerable people. At a time of a global pandemic, when the need to claim our water rights has never been more pressing, it is essential that we redouble our efforts to make the case for the right to quality, publicly owned and managed water and sanitation services protected by law. Please download and use the report available on the End Water Poverty website, and please let us know how you get on with it. I leave you with the words of Philip Alston, the former UN Special Rapporteur on extreme poverty and human rights. States can't dispense with their human rights obligations by delegating core services and functions to private companies on terms that effectively undermined those rights for some people. Thank you all for your participation, every one of you, and let's keep on the fight for the human rights of water and sanitation. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.